welcome to the sixth episode of Universal Podcast, where every episode combines psychology with another topic. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing psychology and travel, and I'm very excited that we'll be speaking with my friend, Rouben Koulaksezian, who is a multilingual author and someone who has traveled to over 100 countries. Ruben, mon ami, mi amigo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Sam. Thank you for having me. Yes, so my name is Ruben. I'm from France. I'm French Armenian. And I'm going to talk about traveling and psychology as an experienced traveler. As you said, I've been to slightly over 100 countries. Plus, having a very... let's say always trying to get a connection with the places I visit, and especially through languages. I almost all the time learn at least a little bit of the language of the place I'm visiting, which makes the experience much more interesting. An author of a book. I wrote a book, a kind of a travel guide book about the Armenian diaspora, so Armenian communities in all of these countries.
And I have that book right here. It's called Little Armenias, and we'll definitely discuss this in a little bit. So I met you first in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then later in Buenos Aires. We bumped into each other, Buenos Aires, Argentina. And then I met you again in Yerevan, Armenia, followed by Houston, Texas, and then recently in Brooklyn, New York. I love to travel, clearly. And I think everyone I've ever met at least says that they love to travel, but you're a little bit different. You are a traveler. You are the verb form of what many of us love to experience. What do you think inspires people to travel, just generally, and for you specifically? What exactly inspires you to travel to all these places, or to travel in general?
It's a very interesting question, but not as easy as you could think, because I think it's very different from a person to another. I have met people that travel only to hike in mountains. I've met people that travel only to tan under the sun when it's winter in their country. I've been meeting people that travel only to do water sports, or I've even met, like, in Eastern Europe, a German guy that was traveling only to watch football games in every small countries of Europe. So it's very diverse, and you have people that travel for the social experience, but it's not the case of everyone, because some people go on all-inclusive vacations where they won't even meet any local person. And I would not do a hierarchy of that, because it's very personal, very subjective. And but I can talk about myself. I think what motivates me is the learning process, in a very, let's say, wide meaning of learning process. I'm very into languages, so that counts a lot. But not only, because you can learn, it can be about music, it can be about history, about culture. You can learn a lot when you travel. And I'd say that you learn also about yourself. You have about that two kind of travelers, like the people that travel a lot. I'd say that some of them are kind of fleeing their own environment or identity. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm not really happy in the place I live in, and I'm traveling to see something more exotic that I like more, and everything else. I'm not in that category. I'm more in the category that's when I travel and I see the diversity of the world and everything, it also helps me understand who I am. And I think that's very important, because you understand better who you are when you see what you are not and who you are not. And you see that through other people. It's done with a lot of respect to the other culture, the other country, the other person. But it's also a way to learn, okay, yeah, that's my difference with that. And I think we can talk about more details later, but it's very interesting in terms of how you see the diversity and how you understand the diversity when you travel.
think that's fascinating. The idea that you better understand who you are by understanding what you're not. And the only way to understand what you're not is to travel essentially outside of your comfort zone. So you've come across a lot of other travelers, of course, staying in hostels and things of that sort. Have you found that that first category of people, the ones who are escaping or fleeing their, we'll say, circumstances, would you say that that has increased ever since COVID?
It might have increased since COVID, but it was something that existed before, for sure. It's increasing with the globalization, let's say. The easier it is to travel, the easier it will be to leave their environment for people that are unhappy in it. And I'd say that, yes, today it's easier to leave your environment if you're unhappy with it than 50 years ago, than 30 years ago, and than 10 years ago, even probably, with like all the COVID clearly increased the amount of jobs you can do online. So of course, people have more opportunities about moving away, and it has good and bad sides, but yeah, surely.
So you have come across many travelers, and you've already given at least two different categories of travelers, of people that you meet on these kind of journeys. So my question is, what lessons about people or about travel itself have you learned?
The thing you learn, and honestly, the thing I learned first when I was really young in my travels, is the diversity, the size of the world first, and the diversity. You don't really see it when you stay. Even if you stay in a multicultural city, you will see some aspects of the differences, but you will not see it fully, because even if you live in New York and Paris, you have people from all over the world, but everyone is kind of, also they will express some sides of their culture, but they will not express all the sides of their culture, because obviously you live in a multicultural city, and you have to also adapt kind of on some views or some behaviors, and that you can see it when you go to different countries, and even not very far, like inside Europe itself, in the US, from a state to another, and of course South America, in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East, you will have a very wide range of diversity of behaviors, and you are like, okay, that's much more complex than I thought this was. So that's what I've learned, I think. And I've learned one thing by myself. I think I was listening more, because I was understanding, like, okay, I was much less sure and convinced of my points of views on society in general, like on many subjects, much less convinced of everything I thought after my travels than before, because you live with a lot of, I'm sure of this and that. And then you realize, okay, now it might be a bit more complex than I thought. And traveling gives you more depths, but the good depths, the interesting ones, the one that makes you curious about it. So it's what I've learned, I'd say, yeah.
I know that there's not so much psychological literature on travel. I mean, there is one book called The Psychology of Travel, and it's by Andrew Stevenson, and the book basically details this. I think it's about 10 chapters. It's 155, 156 pages, and it'll look at things like nostalgia for the places that we visit. It takes kind of a social psychological lens at these different things. And we know that certain things change with us in the experience of traveling. Everything from your digestive system changes, your women's menstrual cycles change, even dreaming changes when you're traveling. And it's not necessarily the change in sleep, but rather dreams are essentially meant to consolidate memory, and new memories get prioritized, of course. And when I say new memories, I don't mean just recent memories, but memories that aren't similar to previous memories. And traveling unlocks that, which is why if anyone wants to dream more, I tell them sleep on your couch instead of your bed, because there's something novel about that. So your mind prepares to consolidate. So these are just things generally with the sort of the psychology of travel. But what about you specifically? How have you as an individual changed? Because there again is some literature. I mean, there was a study in 1956 with, I believe, 900 or so business people who were interviewed on traits like nationalism. And they found that whether they were very open and international or globalist, or whether they were nationalist, their tendency to be on the extremes narrowed. So they became more and more centered. If they started on this side or this side, after traveling, they found that it was narrower and narrower, meaning that we kind of get out of our own heads a little bit as we're exposed to information that's different than what we're obviously used to. So how have you as an individual, as a person, changed across your many, many, many travels?
That's a deep question, but I think I can get that part about why you get more into like closer to the center when you travel, because while traveling, you will 100% complexify your identity. Let's say you always feel part of some collectivity. According to the countries and everything, it can be family, religion, ethnicity, culture, even pop culture, even it can like sports. You're part of a team. You have many things, collectivities around you that you are part of and that define what you are. When you travel, you might add more of these categories. It could be because you have, let's say, you'll go to a country and you will become a big fan of the sport. That you're from the US, you're not much into soccer, and you'll go to Italy for a year, and then you'll be a big soccer fan. So you add a collectivity around you. Or you can be like, I don't know, you can be from a Christian family in France, but because France is kind of very secular, you didn't really have that connection. You will travel to South America, Mexico, and you will see the faith and the devotion in Mexico, and you will get connected to that. So you might add like Christianism maybe to your collectivities that you are part of. These are examples. But when it adds up and you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 collectivities that define your identity, you cannot really be an extremist in one of them. Because if you become an extremist in one of them, you have your 7, 8 other identities that are like, but these guys that are not on my side on this one, they might be on my side on the other one. So the more identities you have in your complexity, the less you can be an extremist in one. And when you see someone that's an extremist in one portion of its identity, usually it's because that category defines him like at all. Like that's the only thing he does. When you complexify that, you cannot really be extremist on that. So that really joins your point.
This is why there's a negative correlation between, we'll call it ethnocentrism, and traveling. Traveling decreases that ethnocentric behavior. It also decreases xenophobic behavior, of course. Now, the question could also be, isn't it just the xenophobic people who aren't traveling? But there's been studies where people begin to travel later on in life. The one writer, he's a travel writer, his name is Rick Steves. He has a beautiful TED Talk. He has this great quote, and it's that travel wallops my ethnocentricity. And that word wallop, it's out, you get the image of like a bully beating someone up, that traveling kind of detaches him, breaks him from that previous mindset.
I will add something because that's very interesting. This is correct that like if you take the very xenophobic people, and they probably like traveling and like opening their world to others.
Well, xenophobic people generally don't travel as much. Yeah.
But you also have one profile, let's say, that if you are also, let's say, a Westerner anyway, like a Western European country or New York, and you feel like, oh, my country is so intolerant, and because it's the West, and we are very intolerant, and we are racist and everything, if you travel, you're gonna realize that it's not just the West, and like the intolerance and racism and discrimination is common life, sadly, in most of the world's countries, and many countries are way worse than the West in these issues. So it fights, of course, the xenophobic person, but traveling fights also against the let's say the very angelic, can you say like, the ideas of the naive ideas of thinking that the whole world is a peaceful place with nice people, but only in our, because I say that because that's the kind of people you could meet in hostels, Westerners having a bit of I don't really know how to define that, but they travel,
we'll say a sort of closed or more narrow understanding of the world, a narrower collection of experiences.
Yeah, but that's the exact opposite of the xenophobic person. Like the xenophobic person is on one extreme, and you have also the other extreme that will say, like the Westerner, that will say the West is evil on earth and the rest of the world is nice and everything, which is not the case. And when you travel, you just realize that all these issues of xenophobia and racism and discrimination are issues that are shared by all the oppressing people in the world, and they exist in every single country and every single city. So that's also a way of understanding the complexity of every subject you will ever think of, honestly.
If you could clarify that a little bit. So you meet some people who, can you explain that a little bit more?
What I'd say is that when you travel, you kind of eliminate the fear of the outside. But I also think when you travel for real and get to know the complexity of the world, you also eliminate the blind obsession for the outside too, if you had some. You just see things in a complex way. So you don't fear as a xenophobic person anymore, because you know people and you know that there are good people everywhere. But you also eliminate that if you had a naive sense of, everywhere else is so cool and so much better than my place, because you see that in every place you also have bad people.
Right. So we'll call that xenophilia. Xenophilia, the obsession with the outside.
I think traveling kinds of eliminates xenophobia and xenophilia.
Yes, so it takes those polarized angles, and again, we'll just say it straight. It grounds you. It grounds people into what exactly this earth is. So that's definitely something that has been proven statistically now. Another thing that's been proven again, psychologically, this was by William W. Maddox and Andrew Galinsky. These are professors. One is at UNC and the other is at Columbia Business School. And they did a study. Actually, they did 5 studies. And they found that there is an increase in creativity that comes from travel. And interestingly, they even found that if they reminisce, or if they're primed about their travels, meaning if they're reminded of their travels, their creativity seems to spike during certain tasks. And I wanted to ask you about that. Why do you think that is? And do you find that in yourself, that traveling has made you to some degree more creative? And do you think traveling makes other people more creative as well?
Oh, yeah. I mean, creativity, as I see it, I don't have the exact definition of it, but I see it as something you are able to have enough input, diversity, and interesting inputs in yourself to create an output that could be through art or could be in your PhD in science, it could be anything, but you will create something because you had good and interesting input. So of course, when you travel, you will have much more things to inspire you, just because you're surrounded by new things. You will be, and in every part of your travel, it's not just the architecture of the Eiffel Tower or the Empire State Building or the Taj Mahal or the Burj Khalifa is wow. So it inspires you. It's not just that. Even like as simple as being in the bus and hearing someone talking in a different language, but also maybe using different tones when they speak, when they argue, seeing two people arguing and seeing that they argue differently, seeing two friends and seeing that their behavior as friends is different than what you would do with your friend back home. It's every single little thing that differs that can inspire you, because then you will not take everything, but the amount of new things you see will 100% give you the inspiration to create something, of course, more creative. So yeah, it increases your creativity.
I like this idea of you're going to create something more creative. It's interesting. It almost sounds like, behind what you're saying, I imagine an artist, and when they travel, they have more tools, more colors, more styles of a brushstroke to implement because of their travels, because they've seen new colors, a color that they wouldn't have seen. And of course, color is a metaphor here. So they have more tools to essentially craft with. And I think that's a very interesting idea. And it's not like they see it once and it's flitting and it passes by and it's gone, but rather they're surrounded by it. It's something that's constant. You gave the example of even the way people argue can be different. And, we are very much a social creature. There's so many different ways in which we can prove that we're a social creature. There's a organelle in the back of our minds, within our brain that called the fusiform face area that's just responsible for recognizing faces. With mirror neurons, we note that if you touch your chin like this, there's a part in my brain that activates that's identical to me touching my own chin. So it's like I'm copying my immediate environment. And, it's almost like every time we see this other, we'll call it the other, or something that's different than what we're used to, it kind of fires within us. And you do that enough times and it becomes a part of you. It becomes that color that now you can tap into. And I think that's fascinating. I mean, Rainer Maria Rilke, in his book, it's not his book technically, but in the book Letters to a Young Poet, discussed memories as essentially a treasure trove, an endless jewel box from which one can create if they're feeling lonely or isolated. And it seems like travel would be inundating that toolbox so that you have so much more to work with.
Where I really think that it's right, it's about the social thing. It's very social. And sometimes you don't realize to what point it's social. And about creativity, I always thought of something. The whole artistic, the painters that were part of Impressionism that were, it was born in France, and you had many painters that were traveling to France, mostly to Normandy or some places in the south of France and some areas in the suburbs of Paris. There were even the French that were not from these regions were going to these regions, and people from abroad were traveling to these regions. So you had some kind of, let's say, a pole of creativity that was born from there. Honestly, I'm not sure that it was the nature there objectively that was much more inspiring than what they would have found in their own countries, in Spain or Germany or England. The light might not be very different. Maybe the landscape is a bit different, and even I'm sure you can find in Spain the same landscapes as you would find in France. I think, but when you have a pole that's forming with many people traveling to the same place, the energy and everything can create, because we are social objects, as you said,
social creatures,
yes. that would work. And I'll go even further. Even people, travelers, you have travelers that are, I'm not interested that much in people and cities. I'm a nature traveler. You have these people, like they go to mountains, lakes, they like to find themselves in an environment that's where they are the only human beings there. Even on that, you don't see the same thing, enjoy the same nature, and feel the same. If you see a wonderful lake in a national park in the US where you paid your entrance, you know that you have guards, you know that someone can come with a helicopter and save you if you fall from that rock, and all that. Then if you see the exact same lake, but you are in the mountains in Tajikistan, somewhere where you got there, like you didn't pay anything to enter, it's pure nature. You risk your life on small, let's say small, ways to get there, and you feel like if something happens to me right now, no one is going to come to save me. So take the same landscape, same lake, same forest, whatever, the human, let's say, environment that you don't see, but the country you are in, the way you got there, the transportation you used, and what could happen if something happens to you, all these things will still kind of
it will color that experience, right?
It'll
color
not just
it
color, that will structure your experience. So even if you're a nature traveler, you're still a social creature, and you will still have all these social human things around the nature you are in that will influence a lot your travel.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That even those who are, we'll say, I don't want to say necessarily introverted, but they're prioritizing nature as opposed to people and we'll call it culture. But you can't escape it because it resonates in everything. It resonates in the laws. It resonates in everything. And sometimes even the nature resonates in the culture. So it has a two-way, it manifests both ways. I think that's fascinating. We keep using this word nature. So I want to ask this question. Do you see individuals who you feel their nature, their natural tendency, or maybe it could even be their upbringing or whatever? Do you meet people who you feel are, we'll say, for lack of a better way to describe this, bad travelers? And what would you say constitutes someone who's not a very good traveler?
I don't think that they are bad. Like I've seen bad travelers, but I don't think that they are bad because they travel. I'm sure these people are bad people even at home. But
I meant more like the way they travel is not conducive to a great experience.
Well, one thing, for example, would be respecting the locals. When you go somewhere, you have to respect the locals. To a certain extent, but you have to respect local people, not make fun of them, not make fun of them in your own language, things like that. Of course, not harm the nature or something, thinking this is not my country, so I can do this or that, is something I really hate, and I would consider bad traveler doing that. I'd say this profile, the people that are traveling, and because it's not their country, they feel like they can do anything they want, and it's often correlated with money. Not always, but it's often correlated with money. They feel like, okay, I have more money than the average person in this city, so I can do whatever I want. But it's not always correlated with money, to be honest. I've seen opposite cases too.
So it's like it could be like a superiority complex, meaning that they think that they're better than the locals.
It can be most of the cases, but not always even. But
Right. And of course, superiority complex doesn't necessarily have to be about money. Of course, people can feel like they're better than other people for any reason, that they believe it. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Another question about nature, and this time it's really like, I think what you do is so unique. What you've done with this book is so unique, Little Armenias, because you've had the, I would say, almost inimitable experience of taking a single ethno group that happens to be a diaspora, and you have cataloged their the presentations of their culture across the world, across many, 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 many cities, and across over 100 countries. So that to me is almost like a cultural version of nature versus nurture. So my question here is, speaking of the Armenian people, what does location change, and what remains constant despite multivarious locations?
It's a very complex question because you have the topic of education, of genetics, of nature genetics, education. What are you born with, and what did you learn, and when
The
did you learn it,
food,
basically?
the food
Yeah.
and
So
nutrients that you have. Yeah.
honestly, I think that there are of course obviously physical aptitudes and physical things that you inherit because it's in your genes, and well, obviously. But it's still it's not a large part of your culture, I'd say. It is, of course, but you have much more going after that. And on the appearance, if you take one single ethnogroup, as you said, the Armenians, that you could have Armenians that are born in Brazil with parents born in Brazil, and that are closely related, genetically speaking, with Armenians that are born in France with parents born in France, and others that are born in Syria with parents born in Syria and Lebanon, and others that are born in Fresno with parents born in Fresno, California. So all of them have kind of the same genotype or genetics, and they will be very different culturally. They will share things. They will share things because they want to share things, because there is an actual fight and for Armenians, for survival and everything as a people that does that. But if, let's take a case that's not real, but if they didn't care at all about that, they would be like 100% different, totally different. And even as like people that still try to keep it, they are very different. Of course they are, because you are influenced and you adapt to the country you're living in. And in terms of culture, if you live in Eastern Syria and Sao Paulo and New York, you have totally different lives. You will have different vision of every single societal topic, and yeah, it's not just even like some people would be, yeah, it's the media, it's the it's much more than that. It's like I'm very I think that we don't consider the complexity of the whole learning process to make you what you are. Even the way your mom hugged you, even the way your kindergarten teacher was showing the letters on the like every single little thing in life makes you what you are, and it's very complex. And even what I don't know. It's very complex. It's very
You're
complex.
right. I mean, because personality is one of the most complex topics ever, and I mean, there's so many people who have spoken about it. One of my favorites is Dr. Gordon Allport, who wrote like the best book ever on prejudice. And he has his own model, and there's personality tests like the Big Five that would look at these we'll say large broad traits like introversion and extroversion, like neuroticism, meaning how badly you react to negative life events, and all of these things. Yet it's still that's such a generalized, zoomed out version of it. I like to think of personality almost like this complex geometric shape that's continuously moving and has many different sides, and that each time you see a side, let's say this side is patience. But patience with what? Patience with working with kids, like what I do, or patience with working with elders, something I don't do. or patience with technology. I have no patience with technology. I have massive patience with children. So even something as narrow as patience can be broken down into all of these different spectrums and all of these different nuances. So of course it can be very different. And it's interesting that you mentioned that even the way your teacher points to a letter, the closest thing I can think of that could even remotely match your experience is, I've had Armenian cuisine made from people who were born in Turkey, made from people who were born in Iran, made from people who were born in Syria, in Greece, in Brazil, specifically Sao Paulo. And the mante tasted different. This same single dish tastes different, even though it might be more or less the same ingredients, but even the proportions of the ingredients and how they're used to the ingredients and how those ingredients, the certain spices or the oils or the bread, how that's different in each region. So they acclimate to that taste.
I don't believe that the genetics influence much. They do, but I think that it doesn't mean that everything is your environment right now. There is something I don't know in psychology how it's seen. It's interesting, and it's not really about travel. It's more about migrations. But how you can be influenced by an ancestor that you didn't know. I'm sure, I don't know how to explain that a few things, yeah, a few personality traits, features are coming from your great grandmother, even though you didn't know her, because it went through your father or grandmother or grandfather all the way through you in little things that are unconscious. That not even like maybe your father will tell you, no, I mean, I didn't give you any kind of heritage because I changed my culture and everything, and but still they did. They don't know about it. I'm sure that some features, personality features, can go on for 5 generations, even though the people passing it over don't even realize they're doing it. And so and people might say it's genetics. It's not genetics. I think it's not genetics. I think it's just like the way you were hugged, the way you were talked to, and the way you were, the whole way you grew up with these people make that even before 3-year old. And I don't think, I don't know. It would be an interesting subject.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing I can think of that even closely parallels that is epigenetics, just how certain things in the environment kind of influence the genes that you're passing down. So one topic that they really, really dive into is trauma, how trauma affects the next generation. And this is something that, there's literature that's growing on it, and some people swear by it, but there's still so much more to uncover there. But I know you're talking about something different, how these certain behavioral traits are, we'll say, almost regressive, or they're not palpable or visible or tangible in a generation, but then 2 generations down, 3 generations down, you see it again. It probably is to some degree, because it often has to be genetic, but the environment has to allow that certain gene to be expressed, or that collection of genes to be expressed, in order for us to witness that particular thing. So maybe if your environment if a specific series of events is parallel to a specific series of events that your great-great-grandmother or great-great-grandfather experienced, perhaps you might behave similarly. You might have that very parallel behavior, and that's kind of what you're talking about, which would be at least to some degree a genetic propulsion, a genetic thing that manifests out.
It's complex. It's true for languages too, because I didn't know Armenian. I've learned Armenian, and I've learned the way my great grandparents were talking, even though it didn't go. It wasn't passed on to my generation all the way from my great grandparents. So my learning process to learn Armenian is similar to the learning process I had to learn, let's say, Portuguese. But I don't feel when I speak Armenian the same way I feel if I was speaking Italian, Portuguese, or Russian or German. I feel as if it was my ancestors that taught me that language, even though objectively the learning process was the same as any foreign languages, let's say, that I have learned. So it's the same thing as you just say. Sometimes when you rebuild something that was from past generations, you see it as different as the things you would adapt to. It's interesting subject.
All of this really is infinite, right? Every single topic, what you should do, what you shouldn't do when traveling, what exactly traveling does to an individual. Obviously, it depends on where you're traveling, how you're traveling, why you're traveling, all of these things. And, the individual also, what they're receptive to, what they're not receptive to, what they're closing off, what they're fighting against, their mood, even when they're traveling, of course, which is a temporary thing, or their temperament, which is more of we'll say a longer lasting, I don't want to say permanent, but a longer lasting trait. So it really is endlessly complex. And I'm really happy that you've uncovered a lot of this for us. So we've definitely done more than scratch the surface here. I want to know, if people are interested in some of the things you've been saying, how can people reach you? How can they contact you?
I'm active on Instagram. That's probably the platform I use the most because it's the way, it's the easiest way, and it's the closest way you can get to an audience I've found until now. So Little Armenians,
like this,
as written in the book here.
Yes,
like this, Little Armenia with an S. I try to post every day videos about it's focused, of course, on the Armenian diaspora, but I'm open to many subjects, and I'm sure that that work I'm doing about the Armenian diaspora is something that could be very interesting if other people did it with other ethno groups, as you said.
Any group that has a diaspora. I mean, I think this is anyone who's interested in culture psychology or cultural psychology. This is a dream. Anyone who's interested in nature versus nurture, this is a dream, this kind of book. I just want to read the back of your book, if that's okay. I'm sure you've read it a billion times. Would you mind if I read the back?
Go on. So
I just think it's so well written. Light a candle at the Armenian church of Addis Ababa. Eat chorovats north of by the way, chorovats is, you would say it's barbecue, right?
Yeah, it's barbecue, Armenian barbecue.
Eat chorovats north of the Arctic Circle in Murmansk.
Yeah.
Play alongside the Armenian football team of Sao Paulo. Shop for jewelry in Burj Hamud, Lebanon. Learn tango in the Armenian neighborhood of Buenos Aires and dance kochari at a restaurant in Glendale, Los Angeles. With this guide covering hundreds of cities in 101 countries, you will be ready to explore the Armenian diaspora. So fantastic. It really is. I mean, I think that's so beautifully written and really does capture what you're trying to do. And, I know, you're not a psychologist, but to me, you've kind of have an honorary degree in cultural psychology, because this is inevitably, I mean, one could say everything is psychology, and that's a big reduction. But with this, where you're traveling to different places and capturing the architecture and the culture, the music, the food, the behavior, all of these things, that's intensely psychological. And I haven't seen anything like this before. And I'm very happy that it gets to be, one, our people, and two, written by someone so awesome. So thank you so much, Ruben.
Thank you, Sam. And I totally agree, as the author of the book, that there is a lot of psychology in.
I thought you were going to say, I totally agree that I'm awesome.
A lot of psychology in studying a diaspora and migrations and cultures. It's a lot about psychology, and that's very interesting because of that. Thank you, Sam.
Of course, Ruben. Do you want to close with anything, or Should we end on this?
Good luck with the next episodes, and I know it's the beginning of that podcast, but I wish you good luck, because that's a very, very interesting for people that are not in psychology, the way you do it, because you're not focusing just on psychology and what you could, I don't know, maybe do when you study psychology at university or something. You're opening it to other topics, and you could be someone interested in one of the other one, like the other topic, and get into psychology this way. So that's a very smart way of approaching psychology, and I like it. So good luck with the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to ensure that the psychosocial literacy of our world is a little bit higher, and I think that's one of the ways that it can be done. Rouben Koulaksezian, Little Armenians, you're awesome. Thank you again.
You too, Sam.
Ciao.
Bye.